The Seattle rain hammered against the 42nd floor windows of Pinnacle Dynamics as I sat in the sterile conference room, watching my career dissolve in real time. The gray October sky seemed fitting for what was about to be the worst day of my professional life. I'd been with this tech consulting firm for 6 years, working my way up from junior analyst to senior project manager, believing that hard work and dedication would eventually pay off. My name is Casey Williams, and until this moment, I thought I understood how corporate America worked. Casey, we need to discuss your future with the company, said Patricia Holloway, my direct supervisor and the woman I'd once considered a mentor. She sat across from me with her perfectly pressed navy blazer and that practiced expression of fake concern that HR probably taught in some workshop. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows on her angular face, making her look older than her 50-something years. Beside her sat Jerome Mitchell from Human Resources, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who kept adjusting his tie nervously. His laptop was open, no doubt displaying my employee file and whatever justification they'd manufactured for this meeting. I don't understand, I said, though part of me was beginning to. The Morrison Industries project was completed ahead of schedule and under budget. Client satisfaction scores were at 92%. Patricia's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. While your technical work has been adequate, we've received concerns about your collaborative approach and team leadership style. Adequate. 6 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and weekend work sessions, reduced to adequate. I felt heat rising in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. Can you be more specific about these concerns? I'd like the opportunity to address them. Jerome cleared his throat and consulted his laptop screen. There have been reports that you tend to take credit for collaborative efforts and that your communication style can be perceived as abrasive. I stared at him in disbelief. Reports from whom? I've never received any negative feedback in my performance reviews. In fact, my last 3 reviews were rated as exceeds expectations. That's why this is particularly difficult, Patricia said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. We value your contributions, Casey, but we feel it's in everyone's best interest if we part ways. We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package. The word generous hung in the air like a bad joke. I'd helped generate over $15 million in revenue for this company in the past 2 years alone. My strategic recommendations had saved 3 major clients from costly implementation failures. I trained half the junior staff and mentored new hires who were now thriving in their roles. This is about the Hartwell account, isn't it? I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's fake smile faltered for just a moment, and I knew I'd hit the mark. The Hartwell Corporation had been my project from the beginning, a complex digital transformation initiative that required months of analysis, planning, and relationship building. Just last week, I'd presented my findings to their executive team, outlining a strategy that would modernize their entire operational infrastructure. The presentation had gone perfectly. Too perfectly, apparently. I'm not sure what you're implying, Patricia said, but her voice had taken on a sharper edge. I'm implying that Hartwell CEO loved my recommendations so much that he specifically requested I lead the implementation phase. I'm implying that this represents the largest single contract in Pinnacle's history. And I'm implying that having the original architect of the strategy leading another firm's execution might be inconvenient for you. Jerome's nervous tie adjusting intensified. Casey, I think you're reading too much into this situation. But I wasn't. It was all becoming clear now. Patricia had been working behind the scenes to position herself as the primary contact for the Hartwell account. She'd been attending meetings I wasn't invited to, having conversations with clients that I should have been part of. The collaborative efforts and communication style Jerome mentioned, those were code words for not being willing to let Patricia take credit for my work. Clear your desk by 5 p.m., Patricia said, her mask of sympathy finally slipping completely. Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck and severance details will be emailed to your personal account. I sat there for a moment, processing the finality of her words. 6 years of my life, reduced to a cardboard box and a security escort. Around us, the normal sounds of office life continued. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, colleagues discussing weekend plans. None of them knew that my world had just imploded. Understand, I said finally, standing up from my chair. I'll have my desk cleared within the hour. As I walked back to my cubicle, I felt dozens of eyes following me. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, and I could already hear the whispered conversation starting. Some colleagues averted their gaze, unwilling to make eye contact with someone who'd just been marked for elimination. Others watched with barely concealed curiosity, probably wondering what I'd done to deserve this treatment. My desk was a monument to 6 years of dedication. Photos from company retreats, awards for outstanding performance, a coffee mug from the client appreciation event, where I'd been recognized for saving a project that was heading toward disaster. Personal items mixed with work documents, creating a small ecosystem that had been my professional home for longer than some people stayed married. I pulled out the cardboard box that Jerome had helpfully provided and began the humiliating process of packing up my career. Each item felt heavier than it should have. The framed certificate from my MBA program. The thank you card from a junior colleague I'd helped through a difficult project. The stress ball shaped like a tiny computer that a client had given me as a joke. Casey. I looked up to see Michael Chun, one of the junior analysts I'd been mentoring. His expression was a mixture of confusion and concern. Is it true? Are you really leaving? Apparently so, I replied, wrapping my coffee mug in tissue paper. But why? You're the best project manager we have. The Morrison Industries thing was brilliant, and everyone knows the Hartwell presentation was a home run. I paused in my packing, studying his earnest face. Michael was 26, fresh out of graduate school, still believed that merit mattered more than politics. I remembered being that naive. Sometimes being good at your job isn't enough, Michael. Sometimes there are other factors at play. He lowered his voice. Patricia's been telling everyone that she developed the Hartwell strategy. She's already scheduled herself for the kickoff meeting next week. Of course she had. I wasn't even out the door yet, and she was already rewriting history. But what could I do about it? I was the one packing a cardboard box while she sat in meetings, planning her triumph. Just focus on doing good work, I told Michael. Learn from what you see, but don't let it make you cynical. By 4:30, my desk was empty except for the computer and phone that belonged to the company. 6 years of professional life reduced to one cardboard box and a laptop bag. I looked around the office one more time, at the colleagues who were studiously avoiding eye contact, at the conference rooms where I'd spent countless hours solving problems and building strategies. The security escort turned out to be a sympathetic older man named Frank who'd been working building security for over a decade. He'd seen this routine play out many times before. Sorry about this, he said quietly as we waited for the elevator. Never gets easier to watch good people get pushed out. Thanks, Frank. I appreciate that. The elevator ride down 42 floors felt like the longest journey of my life. Each floor that passed represented another step away from the career I'd built, another level of distance from the professional identity I'd spent years creating. When the doors opened in the lobby, I stepped out into a different world than the one I'd entered that morning. The Seattle rain had intensified, turning the late afternoon into an early twilight. I stood under the building's awning, holding my cardboard box and feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on my shoulders. Around me, evening commuters hurried past with umbrellas and purposeful strides, everyone heading somewhere important, everyone part of the working world that I'd just been ejected from. My phone buzzed with a text from my wife, Lisa. How was your day? Chinese takeout for dinner. I stared at the message, not sure how to respond. How do you tell someone that your life just changed completely in the space of 30 minutes? How do you explain that the career you'd built together, the financial stability you'd worked toward, the future you'd planned, had just evaporated? I walked to my car through the rain, my suit getting soaked, my cardboard box getting soggy around the edges. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Seattle, past the coffee shops and bookstores and restaurants that made up the fabric of our life here, I tried to process what had just happened and what it meant for everything that came next. I had no idea that by tomorrow morning, Patricia Holloway would discover that sometimes the people you underestimate can surprise you. I had no idea that clearing my desk by 5 p.m. would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to my career. But that night, sitting in my car in the rain, all I knew was that everything I'd worked for had just disappeared, and I had no clue what came next. I sat in my home office until well past midnight, staring at my laptop screen and trying to make sense of what my life had become in the span of 8 hours. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the persistent Seattle rain against the windows. Lisa had gone to bed after we'd had what she generously called the conversation, though it felt more like me repeatedly apologizing for derailing our carefully planned future. My cardboard box sat unopened on the floor beside my desk, a monument to professional failure that I couldn't quite bring myself to unpack yet. Instead, I've been scrolling through job boards, LinkedIn profiles, and company websites, trying to figure out how to explain a sudden termination to potential employers. 6 years at Pinnacle Dynamics, and now I had to find a way to spin my firing into something that sounded like a career opportunity. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept sipping it anyway, more for the ritual than the caffeine. Outside, the city lights blurred through the rain-streaked glass, and I found myself thinking about all the nights I'd worked late at Pinnacle, believing that dedication and results would eventually be rewarded. How naive it seemed now. My phone rang at 12:47 a.m. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a New York area code, which was strange enough at this hour to make me answer. Casey Williams, I said, my voice hoarser than I'd expected. Mr. Williams, this is Robert Hartwell. I nearly dropped the phone. Robert Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Corporation, the man whose digital transformation project had apparently been the final nail in my Pinnacle coffin. I'd presented to him just 5 days ago, walking him through 18 months of analysis and strategic planning that would modernize his company's entire operational infrastructure. Mr. Hartwell, I managed, trying to shift into professional mode despite the late hour and my current state of unemployment. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I apologize for the late call, but I just got off a conference call with our board of directors, and your name came up quite frequently. We've been discussing the implementation timeline for your strategic recommendations. My strategic recommendations. Not Pinnacle's, not Patricia's. Mine. Something warm flickered in my chest, the first positive feeling I'd had all day. I'm glad the board is moving forward with the project, I said carefully. It's going to transform your operational efficiency in ways that will impact every department. That's exactly why I'm calling. We want you to lead the implementation. I was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Mr. Hartwell, I should mention that I'm no longer with Pinnacle Dynamics as of today. I know, he said, his voice carrying a note of something that sounded like amusement. Patricia Holloway called me this afternoon to inform me that you decided to pursue other opportunities and that she would be taking over as project lead. She seemed very confident that she could manage the transition seamlessly. My stomach clenched. Even in my firing, Patricia had managed to make it sound like my choice. I see. The thing is, Mr. Williams, I didn't become CEO of a billion-dollar corporation by accepting substitutions when I know what I want. Your presentation last week wasn't just impressive, it was transformative. You didn't just understand our business challenges, you anticipated problems we hadn't even identified yet. That kind of strategic thinking doesn't come from a company, it comes from an individual. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked streets below. I appreciate that, Mr. Hartwell, but without Pinnacle's infrastructure and resources, I'm not sure how I could manage a project of this scope. That's where things get interesting, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Our board has been discussing this for months. Actually, we've been considering bringing strategic consulting in-house, creating our own advisory division rather than constantly outsourcing to firms that rotate team members and dilute institutional knowledge. My heart started beating faster. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that you become Hartwell Corporation's Director of Strategic Initiatives. You'd report directly to me, with a mandate to not only implement the digital transformation project, but to identify and execute additional strategic opportunities across all our divisions. Full benefits, equity participation, and a salary that I believe will exceed what Pinnacle was paying you. I sat down hard in my desk chair, staring at my reflection in the dark window. 24 hours ago, I'd been a senior project manager at a consulting firm. 12 hours ago, I'd been unemployed. Now I was being offered a director-level position at one of the most successful corporations in the Pacific Northwest. Mr. Hartwell, I'm honored by the offer, but I have to ask, why me? You could hire any number of established consultants with more experience. Because, Mr. Williams, in 30 years of business, I've learned to recognize talent when I see it. More importantly, I've learned to recognize integrity. When Patricia called me today, she presented your strategic recommendations as her own work. When I asked her specific questions about the analysis methodology and market research sources, she couldn't provide answers. It became very clear very quickly that she was taking credit for someone else's insights. The warmth in my chest expanded into something approaching vindication. She's been positioning herself as the primary contact for your account, which is exactly why I want the person who actually developed the strategy to implement it. I don't have time for corporate politics or credit-stealing middle managers. I need results, and you've already proven you can deliver them. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. Not just a job, but a chance to build something significant. Not just employment, but validation that my work had value beyond what Patricia or Pinnacle had been willing to acknowledge. There's one more thing, Hartwell continued. We're implementing this immediately. I'd like you to start tomorrow morning. Our board meeting is at 9 a.m., and I want to introduce you as our new Director of Strategic Initiatives. Tomorrow morning? I looked at the clock. It was already past 1 a.m. I know it's short notice, but we've been planning this transition for weeks. Your termination from Pinnacle actually accelerated our timeline. Sometimes the best opportunities come from unexpected circumstances. I thought about Patricia, probably sleeping peacefully, confident that she'd successfully eliminated a threat to her advancement while positioning herself to take credit for my work. I thought about Jerome from HR, with his nervous tie adjusting and corporate doublespeak. I thought about all my former colleagues who'd avoided eye contact as I packed my cardboard box. Mr. Hartwell, I accept your offer. Excellent. My assistant will email you the contract details and building access information within the hour. Our offices are in the Columbia Center downtown, 48th floor. And Casey? Yes, sir. Tomorrow morning, when you walk into that boardroom, you won't be walking in as someone who got fired. You'll be walking in as someone who got promoted. Remember that. After he hung up, I sat in my home office for another hour, not quite believing that my life had just transformed again. The cardboard box on the floor looked different now, less like evidence of failure and more like the last remnant of a chapter that was ending so another could begin. I finally unpacked it around 3 a.m., placing each item carefully on the shelves of my home office. The awards, the photos, the stress ball shaped like a tiny computer. They weren't symbols of a career that had ended anymore. They were proof of the work that had led to this moment, evidence of the skills that had caught Robert Hartwell's attention. By the time I went to bed, the rain had stopped and the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky. In a few hours, I'd be putting on my best suit and walking into the Columbia Center as Director of Strategic Initiatives for Hartwell Corporation. Patricia Holloway was going to have a very interesting day. The Columbia Center elevator climbed steadily toward the 48th floor, and I found myself thinking about how different this ascent felt from yesterday's descent at Pinnacle. Same city, same gray Seattle morning, but everything else had changed completely. I wore my best charcoal suit with a new tie I'd bought at 6 a.m. from a 24-hour department store, and I carried a leather portfolio instead of a cardboard box. More importantly, I carried the confidence that comes from knowing your worth has been recognized by someone who matters. The elevator doors opened into a reception area that made Pinnacle's lobby look modest by comparison. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. The Hartwell Corporation logo, elegant silver letters on a backdrop of polished granite, dominated the wall behind the reception desk. "You must be Casey Williams," said the receptionist, a professional woman in her 30s with a warm smile. "I'm Jennifer Walsh. Mr. Hartwell is expecting you." As she led me through corridors lined with modern art and awards recognizing Hartwell Corporation's various achievements, I caught glimpses of the kind of operation I'd only seen from the outside as a consultant. This wasn't just a client anymore. This was my new professional home. The board meeting is about to begin, Jennifer explained as we walked. Mr. Hartwell wanted me to give you a quick overview of the participants. She handed me a folder containing brief biographies of the board members I was about to meet. Robert Hartwell I knew, of course, but the others represented a cross-section of Seattle's business elite. Former Microsoft executives, venture capital partners, the founder of a successful biotechnology startup. These weren't people who suffered fools gladly or made decisions based on sentiment. One more thing, Jennifer said as we approached the boardroom. About an hour ago, Patricia Holloway from Pinnacle Dynamics called requesting an urgent meeting with Mr. Hartwell. She said there had been some miscommunication about the project leadership transition. I smiled grimly. Patricia had probably spent the morning discovering that her new role as lead consultant wasn't going to be as straightforward as she'd assumed. What did Mr. Hartwell tell her? That he'd be happy to meet with her after the board meeting to clarify the situation. The boardroom was everything I'd expected from a billion-dollar corporation. A massive conference table made from polished walnut dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The same spectacular view of the sound was visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, and discrete monitors around the room displayed real-time financial data and company metrics. 7 board members were already seated when Jennifer and I entered. Robert Hartwell sat at the head of the table, looking every inch the successful CEO in his perfectly tailored navy suit. He stood as we approached, extending his hand with the kind of firm handshake that conveyed both welcome and confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the room, "I'd like you to meet Casey Williams, our new Director of Strategic Initiatives." The introductions that followed were a blur of names, titles, and brief conversations about my background and the strategic plan I developed. What struck me most was how these successful executives engaged with my ideas. They asked probing questions, challenged assumptions, and built upon concepts in ways that demonstrated both their business acumen and their genuine interest in the project's success. The digital transformation timeline is ambitious but achievable, I explained, walking them through the implementation phases I'd outlined. The key is managing the change in parallel streams rather than sequential phases. We can modernize the customer-facing systems while simultaneously upgrading the back-end infrastructure, reducing overall timeline by approximately 40%. Margaret Singh, a former Amazon executive who now ran her own consulting firm, leaned forward with interest. "What's your projected ROI timeline for the customer-facing improvements? Based on current transaction volumes and the efficiency gained from streamlined processes, we should see measurable ROI within 6 months, with full payback achieved by month 18. The questions continued for another hour, ranging from technical specifications to budget considerations to staffing requirements. These weren't the superficial queries I was used to fielding from middle managers who were more concerned with covering their bases than understanding the work. These were strategic thinkers who wanted to understand not just what I was proposing, but why it would work and how it would impact the broader business. "Casey," said Robert Hartwell, as the formal presentation concluded, "would you mind stepping outside for a few minutes while the board discusses the proposal?" I waited in Jennifer's office, trying to read the tea leaves of what was happening behind the closed boardroom door. Through the glass walls, I could see animated discussion and occasional gestures toward the presentation materials I'd left behind. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, Jennifer received a call asking her to bring me back in. The mood in the room had shifted to something that felt like excitement. Board members were smiling, and there was an energy that hadn't been present earlier. "Casey," Robert began, "the board has unanimously approved the digital transformation project and your appointment as Director of Strategic Initiatives. More than that, we've decided to expand the scope of your role." Margaret Singh picked up where he left off. "We want you to conduct a comprehensive strategic review of all our business divisions. Not just the digital infrastructure, but our market positioning, operational efficiency, growth opportunities, and competitive advantages." This would be a 6-month engagement, added another board member, with the potential to become permanent based on the results. We're talking about a complete strategic overhaul of how Hartwell Corporation approaches business development. I felt that familiar rush of excitement that came with big challenges and significant opportunities. This wasn't just about implementing a single project anymore. This was about helping shape the future direction of a major corporation. I'm honored by your confidence, I said, and I'm ready to begin immediately. As the board meeting concluded and members began to file out, Robert Hartwell approached me with what could only be described as a satisfied smile. "There's someone waiting in my office who'd like to speak with you," he said. "Patricia Holloway from Pinnacle Dynamics. She's been here for about an hour, and she seems quite anxious to discuss the project transition." My stomach tightened slightly, but I realized it wasn't with the anxiety I might have expected. Instead, there was anticipation, maybe even a little satisfaction. Yesterday, Patricia had held all the power in our relationship. Today, the dynamics had shifted completely. We walked to Hartwell's corner office, which was even more impressive than the boardroom. Patricia sat in one of the visitor chairs, her back straight and her expression carefully controlled, but I could see tension around her eyes. She was wearing her power suit, the one she reserved for important client meetings, and her briefcase sat open beside her chair with various documents spread across her lap. She looked up as we entered, and for just a moment, her composure cracked. She hadn't expected to see me here, certainly not in the company of her potential client, and definitely not looking like I belonged. "Patricia," Robert said warmly, "I believe you know Casey Williams, our new Director of Strategic Initiatives." The color drained from Patricia's face. "Your new what?" "Director of Strategic Initiatives," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "I'll be leading the implementation of the digital transformation project we discussed, along with a comprehensive strategic review of all business divisions." Patricia looked between Robert and me, clearly struggling to process this development. "I don't understand. Casey was terminated from Pinnacle yesterday. He's no longer authorized to work on your account." "That's correct," Robert said. "He's no longer working on our account as a Pinnacle consultant. He's working on it as our employee." I watched Patricia's carefully constructed professional facade begin to crumble as she realized what had happened. Her plan to eliminate competition and claim credit for my work had backfired spectacularly. Not only had she failed to position herself as the project lead, she'd actually delivered me directly to her biggest client. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, her voice taking on a desperate edge, "I think there may be some confusion about the intellectual property involved in this project. The strategic analysis and recommendations were developed using Pinnacle's resources and methodology." Robert's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Patricia, I've spent the morning reviewing Casey's work with my board of directors. The analysis methodology, market research sources, and strategic recommendations all clearly originated from his individual expertise and effort. When I asked you specific questions about these elements yesterday, you were unable to provide answers." Patricia's hands clenched around the documents in her lap. Casey was part of a team. The work represents collaborative effort, which is exactly why I'm confused about why his termination was necessary, Robert continued smoothly. "If he was such a valuable team member, why would Pinnacle let him go just as the project was entering its most critical phase?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Patricia had painted herself into a corner. She couldn't acknowledge my contributions without undermining her own claim to leadership, but she couldn't dismiss my value without explaining why Pinnacle had fired someone who'd apparently generated millions in client value. "There were performance issues," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "Performance issues?" I spoke for the first time since sitting down. "Patricia, which performance issues are you referring to? The Morrison Industries project that was completed ahead of schedule and under budget? The client satisfaction scores of 92%? Or perhaps the strategic recommendations that Mr. Hartwell's board just unanimously approved?" She stared at me with something approaching hatred. Yesterday, I'd been a subordinate she could dismiss and discard. Today, I was sitting in her client's office as a senior executive while she scrambled to salvage a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond her control. "I think this conversation has served its purpose," Robert said, standing up. Patricia, I appreciate Pinnacle's interest in continuing the relationship, but we've decided to handle the project internally. Casey will be our primary point of contact moving forward. After Patricia left, walking stiffly toward the elevator with whatever remained of her dignity, Robert and I stood at his office window, watching the Seattle skyline. The morning rain had cleared, and sunlight was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the city in sharp detail. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like justice," I said honestly. Yesterday, I was packing a cardboard box and wondering how I'd explain getting fired to my wife. Today, I'm standing in a corner office planning the strategic future of a billion-dollar corporation. Yesterday, you were undervalued and underutilized. Today, you're exactly where your talents deserve to be. As I prepared to leave his office and begin my new role, Robert had one final observation. "Casey, in my experience, the best revenge isn't getting even with people who underestimate you. It's succeeding so completely that their opinion becomes irrelevant." Walking back through the Hartwell Corporation offices, past the awards and the panoramic views and the bustling energy of a successful organization, I realized he was absolutely right. Patricia Holloway's opinion of my work no longer mattered because I was no longer operating in her sphere. I'd moved beyond her reach, beyond her influence, beyond her ability to take credit for my efforts. Tomorrow morning, she'd go back to Pinnacle Dynamics and explain to her superiors how she'd managed to lose their biggest client by firing the person who generated the relationship in the first place. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting in my new office, planning the strategic transformation of a major corporation. It was better than revenge. It was success. 3 months later, I sat in my corner office on the 48th floor of the Columbia Center, reviewing quarterly reports that showed the early results of our strategic initiatives. The Seattle skyline stretched out beyond my windows, and the sound sparkled in the afternoon sunlight that had finally emerged after a week of typical Pacific Northwest rain. My office had become a comfortable workspace filled with industry analyses, strategic planning documents, and the kind of complex project charts that I'd once created in a cramped cubicle for other people to present. The digital transformation project was exceeding every projected benchmark. Customer transaction efficiency had improved by 38%, operational costs were down by 22%, and client satisfaction scores had reached levels that Hartwell Corporation had never achieved in its 40-year history. More importantly, the strategic review of all business divisions had identified expansion opportunities worth an estimated $200 million in additional revenue over the next 3 years. My assistant, David Park, knocked on my doorframe. David was a recent MBA graduate from the University of Washington, eager and brilliant in the way that reminded me of myself 6 years earlier, minus the corporate naivety that had nearly derailed my career at Pinnacle. "Casey, your 3 o'clock is here," he said. "Michael Chun from Pinnacle Dynamics." I looked up from my reports, surprised. Michael had been one of the few people who'd shown genuine concern when I was fired, one of the junior analysts I'd mentored during my time there. I hadn't spoken to him since that final day when I'd packed my cardboard box. "Send him in, David. And could you close the door behind him?" Michael walked in looking nervous and uncomfortable, wearing a suit that was slightly too large and carrying a leather portfolio that appeared to be brand new. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by the kind of tentative energy that comes with asking for something you're not sure you deserve. "Michael," I said, standing to greet him, "this is a surprise. How are things at Pinnacle?" He settled into one of my visitor chairs, looking around the office with barely concealed amazement. "Things are complicated, actually. That's why I'm here." I poured 2 cups of coffee from the machine that had become essential to managing my expanded responsibilities and handed one to Michael. "Tell me what's going on." "After you left, Patricia tried to take over the Hartwell account, as you probably know. When that fell through, there was a lot of internal blame and finger-pointing. 3 senior consultants quit in the following month, including 2 people from my team. I wasn't entirely surprised. Pinnacle had been built on a foundation of taking credit for others' work and managing clients through relationship manipulation rather than actual value creation. Without the substance to back up the style, that approach eventually collapses. "How are you handling the transition?" I asked. Michael's expression grew more serious. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. I've been offered a position at Morrison Tech, one of Pinnacle's competitors. Better salary, more responsibility, chance to work on bigger projects. But before I make a decision, I wanted to ask if there might be opportunities here at Hartwell. I studied his earnest face, remembering what it felt like to be 26 and ambitious and trying to navigate corporate politics without compromising personal integrity. What kind of opportunities are you interested in? I want to do the kind of work you're doing now. Strategic analysis, client relationship building, project development from conception through implementation. At Pinnacle, I was just executing other people's plans. I want to be the person developing the plans. It was exactly what I would have said at his age, the kind of career ambition that Patricia had tried to suppress in me and that Robert Hartwell had recognized and nurtured. I walked to my window, looking out at the city while considering how to respond. Michael, I'm going to ask you the same question Robert Hartwell asked me when he offered me this position. Why should I hire you instead of any number of more experienced consultants? Because I've seen firsthand what happens when good analysis gets buried under corporate politics. Because I know the difference between consultants who solve problems and consultants who create dependency relationships. And because I learned from watching you that integrity doesn't have to be a career liability if you're working for the right people. I smiled, remembering my own evolution from naive idealist to strategic realist. What makes you think Hartwell Corporation is the right place for that kind of approach? The fact that you're sitting in this office instead of still working in a cubicle at Pinnacle. It was a good answer, direct and honest without being presumptuous. I returned to my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up organizational charts and budget projections that I'd been developing for the past month. Michael, as part of the strategic expansion, we're creating a new division focused on emerging market analysis and growth opportunity identification. It would be a small team initially, maybe 3 people reporting directly to me with access to all senior leadership meetings. His eyes widened with interest. That sounds exactly like what I'm looking for. The position would be senior strategic analyst, starting salary $75,000 with performance bonuses tied to project success metrics. Full benefits, equity participation, and direct client contact from day one. It was 30% more than Pinnacle had been paying him and double what he'd probably expected when he walked into my office. More importantly, it was a chance to build something significant rather than just supporting other people's initiatives. Casey, I accept, he said without hesitation. Don't you want to think about it? Compare it to the Morrison Tech offer? Michael shook his head. I've been thinking about it for 3 months, actually. Ever since you left Pinnacle, I've been wondering what it would be like to work somewhere that valued substance over politics. This is exactly what I was hoping for. After Michael left with employment contracts and a start date of the following Monday, I spent the rest of the afternoon reflecting on how much had changed since that awful October day when Patricia had ordered me to clear my desk. The revenge I'd imagined then had been petty and personal, focused on proving Patricia wrong and making her regret her decision. The reality had turned out to be much more satisfying because it wasn't about her at all. My phone rang around 5:30. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Casey Williams. I answered. Casey, this is Jerome Mitchell from Pinnacle Dynamics. I recognized the voice immediately. Jerome from HR, the nervous man with wire-rimmed glasses who'd sat beside Patricia during my termination meeting. The man who delivered corporate doublespeak about collaborative approaches and communication styles while avoiding eye contact. Jerome, I said, settling back in my chair. This is unexpected. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Michael Chun. I want to speak with you about a potential opportunity. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, Jerome had been part of the team that fired me. Now he was calling about opportunities. What kind of opportunity? Well, as you may have heard, Pinnacle has been going through some transitions since you left. We've lost several key clients, and there's been significant turnover in senior consulting positions. I hadn't heard the details, but I wasn't surprised. Companies built on taking credit for other people's work eventually run out of talented people willing to be exploited. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, though my tone probably didn't convey much sympathy. The partners have been discussing ways to rebuild our strategic consulting division, and your name has come up repeatedly. We'd like to offer you a position as senior partner with a significant salary increase and equity participation. Senior partner, the position I'd dreamed of during my 6 years at Pinnacle, the level of recognition I'd thought would take decades to achieve, now was being offered to me by the same company that had fired me for allegedly inadequate performance and poor collaborative skills. That's very generous, Jerome, but I'm quite happy in my current role. Casey, I understand you're working with Hartwell Corporation, but this would be a partnership position with significant autonomy. You'd be leading your own team, developing your own client relationships, setting your own strategic direction. Like I said, I'm happy where I am. There was a pause on the other end of the line. May I ask what it would take to get you to consider returning to Pinnacle? The question hung in the air, and I found myself thinking about all the ways I could answer it. I could demand Patricia's termination. I could insist on a formal apology and acknowledgement that my firing had been unjustified. I could require guarantees about project attribution and client relationship ownership. But as I looked around my office, at the strategic plans spread across my desk, at the view of Seattle that had become part of my daily routine, I realized that none of those things mattered anymore. Pinnacle Dynamics was part of my past, a stepping stone that had led me to where I belonged. Jerome, there's nothing Pinnacle could offer that would interest me. I'm building something here that's bigger and more meaningful than anything I could have accomplished as a consultant. I understand your loyalty to your current employer, but partnership positions don't come along often. The financial package we're prepared to offer would be significantly more than what you're earning now. It's not about money, Jerome. It's about working somewhere that values substance over politics, where good work gets recognized regardless of who takes credit for it, where strategic thinking is encouraged rather than suppressed. Another pause. Casey, I want to be honest with you. Patricia is no longer with the company. I felt a small jolt of satisfaction, though it was tempered by the realization that Patricia's departure probably had more to do with lost clients and revenue than with any recognition of her management failures. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and this time I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't take pleasure in other people's professional disasters. The partners realized that mistakes were made in how your situation was handled. We'd like the opportunity to make things right. Jerome, the partners made their position clear when they had you and Patricia fire me for allegedly poor performance while my work was generating millions in client revenue. I appreciate the call, but I'm not interested in returning to an organization that operates that way. After I hung up, I sat in my office as the Seattle evening settled over the city. The lights were beginning to twinkle in the buildings across downtown, and the sound reflected the last traces of daylight. In a few hours, I'd go home to Lisa and tell her about Michael's hiring and Jerome's unexpected job offer. We'd laugh about the absurdity of Pinnacle trying to rehire someone they dismissed as inadequate. And then we'd talk about the vacation we were planning with the bonus money from our successful quarterly performance. David knocked on my doorframe. Casey, Mr. Hartwell wanted me to remind you about tomorrow's board presentation. He said to tell you that the expansion proposal looks excellent. Thanks, David. I'll review the final numbers tonight. Tomorrow, I'd be presenting a comprehensive growth strategy to Hartwell Corporation's board of directors, outlining opportunities for market expansion that could double the company's revenue over 5 years. It was the kind of high-stakes strategic work I'd always wanted to do, presented to an audience that would evaluate it on its merits rather than its political implications. As I packed up my materials for the evening, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The termination that had felt like professional death had actually been professional rebirth. The humiliation of packing a cardboard box had led to the satisfaction of building something significant. The powerlessness of being dismissed had evolved into the empowerment of being valued. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. How was your day? Dinner's ready when you get home. I smiled as I typed back. Great day. Even better evening ahead. On my way home now. The elevator carried me down from the 48th floor, past all the levels where other people were working late, past the lobby where security guards nodded respectfully, out into the Seattle evening where my car waited in the executive parking garage. 6 months ago, I'd taken this same elevator ride in reverse, carrying a cardboard box and wondering how I'd explain my failure to my wife. Tonight, I carried a leather portfolio filled with strategic plans that would shape the future of a major corporation. Tomorrow morning, I'd walk back into this building not as someone seeking employment, but as someone whose expertise was essential to the organization's success. Patricia Holloway had ordered me to clear my desk by 5 p.m., thinking she was eliminating competition and positioning herself for advancement. Instead, she'd freed me to discover my actual worth in an environment that recognized and rewarded excellence. As I drove through the familiar streets of Seattle toward home, I realized that the best revenge wasn't proving Patricia wrong or making Pinnacle regret their decision. The best revenge was succeeding so completely that their mistakes became irrelevant to my life. Tomorrow morning, I'd walk into the Columbia Center as Director of Strategic Initiatives, ready to present growth opportunities that could transform Hartwell Corporation's future. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a calling, a chance to build something meaningful with people who understood the difference between value creation and credit claiming. Patricia had been right about one thing. I did clear my desk by 5 p.m. that October afternoon. What she hadn't anticipated was that clearing that desk would be the first step toward claiming a much better one. The story of my termination had become the story of my transformation, and I wouldn't change a single detail of how it had unfolded.